Good evening and welcome to the board workshop of the Board of Education. Today, Tuesday, May 7th, 2019. Mrs. Smith, can we have a roll call, please?
You may. Ms. Cummings?
Here.
Ms. Weems?
I'm here.
Mr. Mukama?
Here.
Mr. Rich?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Present.
I myself here. Ms. Green?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Moving into items from the president, can we have an approval of the agenda?
I move the Board of Education approve the board workshop for today, Tuesday, May 7th, 2019, as presented.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve the agenda by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Cummings. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the agenda is approved. Next, moving to announcements. The next meeting of the Board of Education will be held on May 7th, 2019, immediately following the workshop at 6:30 p.m. This meeting is open to the public and will be cablecast live on TV 10. Public comment request cards are available in the back of the room. If you would like to speak during public comments, please fill out a card and place it in the ceramic bowl next to Trustee Weems. Please remember to silence all cell phones and electronic devices at this time. In addition, out of courtesy to those in the audience, we ask that you refrain from sidebar conversations and that you step out into the hallway if you feel the need to carry on a conversation. We thank you for your cooperation. Moving into public comments. Are there any public comments? Okay, seeing no public comments, we will move forward. And tonight we will be working with both of our wonderful people from MASB on our interview preparation. And so with no further ado, come on up. And Donna, we'd like to congratulate you on your new position with MASB.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, I think what we will do, Dr. Green and I held kind of planning sessions, so what we'd like to do is first just work through what you can expect in the interview process as a whole. Okay, so there's some preparation that we need to do for that. Want to make sure that you have a good sense of what it's going to be like when we're here to do first round interviews of our candidates. Then we will work on interview questions. Now, understanding that we don't need to read all of the questions in the open meeting. You have a draft that you're going to go over. You'll provide some feedback and work through that with Dr. Green. But those actually meet the open meetings expectation when they're actually read aloud to the candidates in the open interviews. So just kind of understanding how that works. And then last of all, we will identify the folks that you would like to bring in for a first round interview to be superintendent of Farmington Public Schools. So you, of course, received access to information last Friday. I think actually it was Thursday that you received access, and were able to review the applicant information of all the applicants. And so we will do that, of course, today in an open meeting, but by number only. So no candidate names or districts will be mentioned. I lay that out now just so that your audience and anybody who's kind of watching on TV has an understanding of what they can expect. Okay, great. So we'll switch to, oh, yes, sir.
Just so everyone's clear, I understand the reason why we don't do that, but could you just take a brief moment and explain it to the people that are here and the people that are watching on TV why we don't use names and districts?
Sure, because it's kind of a marriage of two concepts, right? Michigan's Open Meetings Act requires that boards conduct business in public, and that includes hiring of their superintendent. However, because it is such an open and transparent process, candidates have the right to request confidentiality until such time as they are offered and accept an interview. And so the board could take the option to go into closed session because there is a closed session exemption for this. However, we recommend that you do it in an open session, and we simply do that by number, not using names or districts, and that way your community can hear your thinking and any kind of conversation that you have, deliberation, they're able to kind of understand what you're valuing as you look at selecting folks to interview, but we're also honoring that folks have requested confidentiality. Thank you. Good question. All right, so let me just get some materials to you. Kim, I apologize, I'm gonna owe you some copies, so I'll just admit that right out of the gate. So these are already collated.
I'm sorry, as you're passing this out, we're just getting some bad feedback from this
On
speaker.
this side.
Right there.
Okay. There's one handout short in yours, and it's just a sample. And so when we get to that point, if you will share, if you would mind doing that, that'd be great. So, oh, I guess I did have an extra copy, so I'm gonna trade with you. That way you have everything. Thank you. So I only owe you one thing. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that.
And we can write on these.
Yep, those are your copies. So what you have in your handouts is a copy of the PowerPoint. You also have a copy of do's and don'ts for interviewing that comes from the Office of Civil Rights, right? And then I brought with you a copy of an interview guide. We won't be using the same one, obviously, for you, but I want you to know what you can expect to get from us. So I wanted you to see a sample, and that way we could answer your questions this evening so that you're well prepared the next time we get together. So that's what's in your packet. Okay, so we will shift to the PowerPoint now. I'm kind of looking for them to make the shift over there. There we go. And so understanding that interviews are just about getting to know the candidates, right? And also that they're what? Remember, we've talked about this a lot. You guys are ready for the master's exam in this. Interviews are the least predictive aspect of a superintendent search. So there's a lot of other information that we have to gather and a lot more information that we have to do. And you know, one of the things that we would tell you is don't get too far ahead of yourself in this process. There'll be points where you're feeling pretty high anxiety and also points where you're feeling like, hey, this is going great, you know, we're moving right along. Lean into the process. That's why we lay that out so explicitly in the beginning. And part of that is just gathering additional information. I like to describe the first round interviews as having a cup of coffee, right? So we're not making a commitment, we're not choosing the next superintendent, we're just simply getting acquainted, getting a feel for, you know, some of their experiences, how they communicate, things like that. Some of the folks that you identify that you would like to interview, some of them are going to be very practiced interviewers, and some are not. You know, understand that while communication style and presence is certainly relevant, there are many superintendents in the state of Michigan who are very successful who are not necessarily charismatic. So you need to be able to look for much more substance than just kind of that initial, you know, flair. So other things that we're going to do a close review of their previous experience. If candidates were known to us, Dr. Green and I were able to bring that to bear in some of the analysis that we did. But keeping in mind that confidentiality at this point extends to us as well. So if we didn't have a previous experience with those folks, there may be things that we're not privy to that we will be working on as far as background checking and investigation as well. A lot of people poo-poo reference checking and just say, well, first of all, one of the most common things we hear is who would list somebody as a reference who's going to say negative things about them, and I will tell you, happens every single search. And so even those references that they list are actually very, very relevant. One of the things that those folks will talk to us about is strengths, potential challenges, and that allows us to fact check as well. And so certainly the references they list are important, but also the people that they don't list, previous employers, extended network. Some of you were, you know, pulled into other searches recently, so I know that you have some experience with the fact that once we get past first round interviews, you will all have some assignments of some homework that you have to do, and you'll be glad that you did it. It won't take a ton of time, but it will definitely expose you to a lot more information about these candidates. So that's reference checking, fact checking, and then I like to think of the second round interviews really as, okay, we've had a cup of coffee, now we're just going to lunch, right? So it's just one more step. And referring to those as second round so that if you're not ready to make a decision, we're always going to ask you, hey, what additional information do you need to feel good about making a decision? So one step at a time. So if you'll shift gears for me and go into your pile and look at that sample interview guide that is in your handouts. Those questions for that district have already become public, right? So it's okay that you're seeing them. I'm not worried about them being in your hands. But what you see when you look at that guide is that we worked with that board to determine what questions they wanted to ask in their first round interviews. Then we organized them into an interview guide. Every board member has a specific assignment, so you know exactly what questions you're going to be asking ahead of time. And, you know, you'll get that ahead of time, so you can look it over, acclimate yourself to the document. You will fill out an interview guide for every candidate that we interview, right? And so we'll bring all those materials and copies with us. That's not something that you have to worry about. Now, if you have kind of some supplementary material, so like one of the things that I always encourage board members to do is after we determine the interview questions, you should spend some time thinking about what are you going to be listening for specifically, because you won't have a shared understanding of what's important to you in each of those. And having done that work, it takes hours and hours and hours to get all board members on the same page for what we're listening for in questions. You can at least make those notes ahead of time so that you have your thoughts well organized and that you can bring that to bear after the interviews when we're deliberating. So that's another reason to look through the interview guide and just get comfortable with it. When you glance through that, so sometimes the board president looks at it a little differently. So you see there's an opening script and a closing script. So do you have any questions, Madam President, when you look over kind of your part in it?
Not at this point.
Okay. Question over here?
I do have some questions. I'll only ask one because I'm sure you're going to go over most of them. How appropriate is it to continue to probe when you're asking a question? Because I can appreciate that some are better interviewees than other, right? And if we're looking for a star, in my experience when I've been interviewing, I will re-ask the question and or ask a different question to try to get an example so that I can, understand a bit better whether they're being responsive to the question. How much of that is that fair to do?
The issue in the first round is that you're trying to compare the candidates against each other. And so we'll dig more deeply into this as you're buttoning up those interview questions. Our standard guidance is to tell you not to ask follow-up questions in first round because each one takes you down a rabbit hole. And so it takes a lot more time. You have to plan a different format, but also because follow-up questions are not consistent, you could inadvertently be giving one candidate a much greater access or opportunity than another candidate. So we like to see first round questions be very consistent. Now, if they ask you to repeat the question, then by all means, do repeat the question. We have occasionally seen districts that have made board members have made the decision to make the questions public ahead of time so that the second night doesn't have an advantage over the first night. All I can say to you about that is it confuses the candidates sometimes. I know that seems weird, but sometimes they just don't perform as well when they have them ahead of time, which I know is not what you'd think, but boards sometimes make that decision. That's something that we'll talk about today, but just know that that's something. The other issue that you'll have to come to terms with is for first round interviews, do you plan to let the candidates ask you questions? Because if you were to interview me and say go through 16 or 17 questions with me, and then at the end the president may say, well, Donna, thank you for visiting with us today. Do you have any closing questions for us? One question to a board of 7, right, can be a considerable amount of time, especially if all of you are going to answer it or some of you are going to answer it, or are you just going to designate that your president answer it? So those are the things that we need to be explicit about today so that we can plan to have the right amount of time. Because Dr. Green's going to get you to a point where there's only so much time for X amount of questions, and that will be one of the things that you'll need to be able to work through when he covers that section. Okay? So specifically then, my advice is, unless you, as a board, struggle with the idea of asking all of the same questions of your first round candidates, I would recommend that you ask those questions consistently and that you hold off on follow-up questions. When you are using the interview guide and a candidate either falls short of answering or answers in a way that you have another question, like you'd like more information, I would encourage you to note that in the interview guide. That way, if we're inviting them back, then we can certainly make sure that those are, part of the questions that we include in that next round. Okay? Any other questions about that? So for the trustees at large, when you look through the interview guide, you see that we have it laid out in such a way that not all of the questions, but most of the questions that you're going to see that we recommend are going to be behavior-based. That's why there's that framework in there. And it's not a secret. We actually advise candidates to try to provide answers in that framework so that you have real facts that you can check up on. So we say, hey, the board wants to know what the situation was, what was your task at hand, what was your specific role in it, what was your response, what were the outcomes. That way, if I say I did this terrific turnaround effort or this great work with my teachers, right, when we're fact-checking, we can fact-check to see if that is an actual truth. So that's why that framework's in there. Not all board members use it, and of course at the bottom, there's just a sort of simple scoring rubric as well that you could choose to plug in. That's for your use only. We're not going to be doing some elaborate tallying. That's not how this will work, but that's really for your reference. Understanding that any of the notes that you take during interviews are subject to the Freedom of Information Act. And so you just want to be mindful and not doodle about something else and then think, ooh, I probably shouldn't have written that on there, right? You want to be purposeful throughout the whole process. Okay, great. So sometimes both the interviewees and the interviewers just have kind of a fair amount of cultural noise that you just need to expect. So especially for the candidates, they get nervous. And sometimes they'll get a tick because they're nervous. So if they fall into a situation where they're doing a lot of ums or for examples or just something that is repetitive that is distracting you, I would encourage you to just write that down, just park it in the interview guide and stop paying attention to it so that you can instead focus on the substance of their answers. We like to see you create a consistent environment for all these first round interviews. So I understand that some of you are just naturally kind of more commonly smile, right? Like that's your kind of resting pose, and that's okay. What I would suggest to you is just that you be consistent. Whatever you do it with each of the interviewees, as opposed to, you're smiling and you're nodding for the first one and then you're kind of scowling at the next one, right? That can, believe it or not, really throw them off their game. So just be yourself, but be consistent in that, and that usually works out just fine. So we've already addressed this issue of not redirecting in this case because we're going to stick to the script in this first round. What you really want to note is if they're just pontificating and they're not providing any facts or substance, then that's something that you want to make sure that you indicate in your interview guide. Because if that's what you're looking for in the answer, then you need to hear that in the answer. This is also an assessment for you to be thinking about, how is this person going to communicate with our community? How is this person going to communicate with our staff members, right? So all that matters. Okay. I already talked about listening responses and just being consistent in that. I can't think of many situations that are more nerve-wracking for candidates than a superintendent interview. Can you, Dr. Green? And so some districts, maybe it's not so intimidating, if it's a smaller district and it doesn't get media coverage or it's not televised, but this is a serious situation here, right? So just understanding that these folks are probably going to come in here pretty nervous. Some will settle in nicely. Some you may not get a sense of till second round. There's usually a pretty significant difference between first and second round interviews. So just know that. That's why we have to be very thoughtful in who we invite back for second round, because wow, is it just such a difference. Do any of you have any feedback or perspective on that? Kind of the difference between first and round, or question, just so you know where we're going, or you feel like you have a handle on that? Okay, all right, good. Just realizing that those second round interviews are going to be much less formal and much more conversational, so we will get to the point that many of you I know want to go, right out of the gate. That's part of the process. Okay, good. So realizing that there's a real thing called interview bias. That's a real thing. That's not a made-up thing. And so I know we've talked about this a lot, even in some of the work, that we've done together. But the more you can coach yourself to be completely open in this process, the more information you will be able to gather to make a good decision. And so really try to acknowledge if you are feeling sort of a bias come up, and it's just natural, we're all human. But if you feel that come up in this process, really discipline yourself to acknowledge that you're having it, that you're kind of experiencing this, and say, hey, I see myself doing that. I need to make sure I'm keeping my ears open and really paying attention to all that this candidate has to offer. So that is, that's really important. And I will say even in our screening of the candidates, you have some candidates that bring some very different skill sets, very different personalities, to the district. And so it will be important that you be as receptive as possible, I think, so that you can really sort through, what's going to work here, both from a competencies, skill set, qualifications, but also fit for the community and the district as a whole. I think that's important. And then just for those of you who feel often that you have to be kind of good hosts and good hostesses, you don't need to worry about that so much in the interviews. And so as you are moving from one question to another, so for example, if Trustee Cummings asked a question of a candidate, and then the candidate answered and you're all taking notes, and then it becomes Trustee Rich's opportunity to ask a question, it's entirely okay for you to wait a few minutes and let there be silence, see that your fellow board members have finished up their notes, and then begin your question. So don't feel like you have to rush to the next question. That's okay. And also, it's perfectly okay to repeat the question. So don't feel like you can't. Sometimes boards get in the habit of putting compound questions together to try to act like they're saving questions. And we only go so far as to try to talk you out of that. But because of that, candidates may say, did I answer that question entirely? So you're going to have to make a judgment call about if they missed a part to point that out or not, because what you don't want to do is lead them down the rabbit hole. But if your questions become too complex, make sure you read it slowly, make sure that they seem to have, we advise them, bring their own writing utensils, bring a notebook, take notes as you're asking the questions, but just to reiterate that, because that's a kind of a common thing that we see is too many questions in one question. And then you don't have to validate their answer. So if they're done and they say to you, did I answer the question? You can say, yes, thank you. Right? That way you're not giving them a quality answer one way or the other. Okay, so take notes even if you're not a note taker. And the reason for that is that it becomes more difficult as you move through different interviews to remember those nuances. It's true there'll be a video record here, but you won't have access to that readily when we're deliberating to determine who to bring back. And so taking good notes is going to help you be attentive. It's going to help you remain open. It's also going to give you something to refer back to if you see things differently, and board members are sort of comparing strengths or potential of candidates. You'll be glad that you have those to refer back to. So I will tell you that I am not a note taker, but I do take notes during interviews for that specific reason. It's just a very handy thing. And then just, as I already mentioned, make a note of if they didn't answer the question or if there's additional items that you'd like to explore further, make a note of that so that when we're to that point, if they're invited back, we can dig deeper. You can dig deeper and get additional information. Okay? Great. So before we just talk about, logistics in general, I handed out, as I said, the Department of Civil Rights do's and don'ts. Now, in this round, you're not asking any unscripted questions, but in the second round, you will be. And so Dr. Green and I will provide some starter questions for you, but we will also expect each of you to bring questions as well. And we'll talk about what that looks like. But to that in mind, we do see boards that sometimes just out of nerves ask an illegal question. It doesn't happen very often, and it's never done intentionally. I mean, I can honestly say it's almost always like they're trying to be friendly, and so conversational. So they'll, as somebody's settling in, they'll say, "Oh, well, do you have any kids?" Or it's like, okay, we're not asking that question, right? Or even that, I know we talked about it before, but this idea about thinking casually that you would ask something like, well, do you plan to move to the district? Like, nope, we're not asking that question, right? We can't compel residency. And so it's a good idea to look through that list of do's and don'ts. There's a narrative on one side and then a very Well, okay, I can see your face already.
Well, just something you just said, which was compel residency, so just as a follow-up to that, so we may not be able to say, are you moving to Farmington, but we can, within contractual basis, say they have to live within a certain distance from the community, correct?
20 miles contiguous, perimeter to of the district. Now, the issue, though, is that when we brought that up in selection criteria, the board set it aside. And so if you were going to do that, I would have encouraged you to do that then, so prospective candidates would understand the expectation. It doesn't take the issue completely off the table, but you would offer a longer timeline. So sometimes what we see in contracts is an incentive to be within the legal possibility of compelling residency, just to kind of incentivize it. And so that will be something that you could look at depending on the circumstances. I think part of the reason why the board made that decision is just there's so much proximity where you're located now, right? There's such easy access to the district that you felt like you didn't have to split hairs over that. You certainly, regardless of that piece, would ask questions like, how would you invest in the community? Tell us about what you think a visible superintendent does, and those kinds of things we would definitely expect. So we've talked a lot about first round. I just want to begin to kind of set the context for second round, and that those being much less formal, we'll be focusing much more on the strengths and potential challenges of whomever you move forward. Usually you're going to move 2 forward. I do not recommend that you move fewer than 2 forward. That would put the board at a disadvantage from a kind of a strength position. Sometimes boards opt to move 3 forward. We're going to be respectful of that. If you think that that is important, we'll know more after we get through the first round, but just so you know what to expect. We already have an outline of visitations for that day. For the finalists. Those second round are generally called finalists. And so that's already been circulated. I know some conversations have already been had with staff because I've seen some questions that have come through about that. Keeping in mind, if we add a third person, then we have to think about how do we manage that in the schedule. So doesn't mean it's not doable, just means we have to think a little bit more about that and how that looks, okay? So for board members, to be clear, for those second round festivities, you do not attend the visitations, the open conversations with staff or community. You are welcome to attend kind of an open house format right before, and of course you need to attend interviews, but just so you know what expectations are. And so we'll build in that vehicle for those folks who have in contact with the finalists to be able to share their feedback with you. That's built into the process. So that's all there. So, we'll also talk about time management, and so generally speaking, I find that it works best if we if we're getting tight on time, we simply hand the board president a post-it note that says, we're getting close on time, please move to final question. This is for first round interviews. And so the final question is always some sort of a closing statement. And so if that happens, let's just say we're going in order, and if for some reason we skipped Trustee Smith and the board president said, oh, well, our time is winding down tonight, we'd like to give you the opportunity to ask any final questions, you would understand that it's actually because they're likely to run out of time. We're timing their answers, so we are seeing how they're pacing themselves, and then we're going to adjust accordingly. We try to keep those the total time within just 2 or 3 minutes of each other, again, because it's about fairness, and the public pays attention too. And so, but if you end abruptly without that kind of closing opportunity, it really doesn't feel very good. So that really is the best. Dr. Green, do you have any further perspective on that? You should come to the microphone if you do.
I will in a moment.
Okay, great. I'm getting good on this microphone thing here. But
So Donna,
Kim scares me.
if we do site visits, which I think we've all kind of talked is an important factor to us, where does that fall? Is that just before second round interviews or after?
After. And so we would work through that. It's good to know that you've coalesced around that.
Well, we haven't all weighed in, but we've had some informal conversations, so.
Okay, so we'll be looking for 2 board members, right? No more than 3, because it has to be fewer than a quorum.
Okay.
We'd like to see additional stakeholders go with the board to round that out. So representative from the teachers union, representative from administration, representative from the principals, representative from your parent groups, that kind of thing. So there's a team. I like to see ideally you're going to go to one. But if you're going to go to two, in other words, because you're still looking at two at that point. A lot of times you've gone down to one by that point. But that the same team go to both locations. Otherwise, the reports are apples to oranges. And so when you send the same team, at least it's the same team of folks that are experiencing it. Okay? So
Yeah, no, we have not discussed it as a board. It was just in the initial, when we started talking.
Okay.
Several of us were having dinner and said that would be a part of the process we would consider, so we haven't followed back up with any
Okay.
conversation, so.
Well, where are we at? Let's talk about that now. Just checking in, just because we'll want to make sure that there is appropriate time for that in the timeline then.
Anybody have input? Thoughts?
I don't know what was the previous conversation.
We had just said that one of the things that we've typically done in our district in previous
Maybe nobody.
hiring is that they did a site visit, which can be insightful as you're looking at that. But we didn't make any kind of commitment that that would be part of our process. So I think what Don is asking is that something, as a board, we would be interested in.
Can I just ask a quick question of Donna and Rod? What would a site visit consist of?
So what happens is that a finalist will put together a list of possible locations and individuals with whom the site visit team would interact with, have conversation with, meet with. And even though they've become more, a little less structured and a little more spontaneous now, they're still pretty structured, which is why, from our perspective, we work with boards that love them and we work with boards that are like, oh, it's not a good use of our time. So we're pretty respectful whichever way you go. The key is that you have to be realistic about what you can assess. So in other words, if you go to, can you go to a district and say, well, their facilities are not half as nice as ours? No, probably not, right? You might be able to have some perspective about the maintenance of those or the intention of where they're taking it, that kind of thing. But you have to be very, I think, specific about what it is you're looking to gather information on.
And I'm sorry, just as a brief thought, who sets, we'll have that set before we leave, right? In other words,
Right.
if it's decided that we're gonna do this, we would say, okay, we're gonna look at, the instructional manuals, we're gonna talk to two
Yeah.
teachers. I'm trying to understand.
You're going to, usually, like at the end of the second round, when you're boiling down, you're going to make your final decision on this, and I know Donna said, hey, let's kind of decide, but sometimes it's hard to feel it, and I know you probably have this as well in other districts. You might want to do a site visit, you might not, but when you go to it, you're asking the candidate to basically set it up for you. So you would have a team go in and you'd meet with some teacher representatives. You'd meet with some principal representatives. You'd meet with some board representatives. Then you'd have lunch. You'd meet with some parents, and then you're coming back. And basically, it's almost like an on-site interview of people other than the candidate, asking about the candidate, if that makes sense.
Mr. Rich?
It seems like it's a expanded face-to-face reference check.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's
exactly.
interesting way to put it, yeah.
And so some districts, don't do it anymore because they do a more thorough job on the reference checks. So, but it is a possibility. I'm not going to say, you just have, it's like you'll feel it when you get closer to it. Right now it's hard to feel it because you're still not even sure where you're at with the whole thing. So,
Mrs. Smith?
When you say, because I think it's very important that our parent groups, if we did decide to do this, that they would take part in this. So so say for example, if we did go along with this and we said we would use our PTA, how many could our PTA
Like
council?
one or two people.
Okay.
yeah.
Depending on
Looking
how
at-
many other folks you have.
Right.
'Cause
So we're not taking a,
20,
like a,
right?
right,
Yeah,
we're
you're
not
looking
taking a
at
caravan.
6 or 7
right?
people at
Okay.
the most
Yeah, it's
total.
pretty limited.
And 3 of them are board members. And the other thing is, it's a board decision, so, obviously that's why we do it all here, so everyone can participate and all of
Right.
that. But a site visit's a possibility, but it's hard to feel it right now, I think, for everybody.
And you know, a lot of it depends on circumstances. So honestly, a smaller district who's drawing applications from smaller district superintendents or smaller district central office or principals, you can go down to the coffee shop in their community. Well, I mean, honestly,
Yeah. some
there's a
places
scale
have
here
it.
that's different for you, right? And so that's part of what we would want to negotiate in that, is what does that look like?
Mrs. Cummings?
Actually, my thought was exactly how Mr. Rich phrased it. This really does seem more like a face-to-face reference check.
Right.
Because if it's being set up by the candidate, I would
Right.
assume they're picking
Yeah, and
people
it's
for a
and
reason.
sometimes we can have input into that too. We can say we want some time at the barber shop and the coffee shop, and you know, or we as the consultants can say, hey, these are the people we want to talk with. You know, so we can manage that a little bit, but you're still looking at a general face-to-face reference check is what it is, and sometimes it's effective, sometimes it's not.
And you wouldn't be reviewing any documentation other than that which would be
Right.
appropriate for the public to view. You know, so it's
Yeah.
not like you're getting backstage access and
No.
like what the hang out
Would
there.
that be repetitive then of some of the reference checks that we're going to be doing
Very
individually?
well, maybe, yes. You
So,
know,
okay.
I mean, I know Donna's done a ton of searches too. I've done about 30 searches, and I've only had two boards that have done site visits. So that
Okay.
gives you a little perspective.
Okay.
Mrs. Weems?
I tend to agree with Mrs. Cummings and Mr. Rich around the, fact-checking, but I see this as an opportunity to perhaps go beyond just the reference and maybe perhaps validate some of what we got through
Sure.
the questioning, which won't necessarily be in some of the recommendation letters or references. And I also appreciate, what you said, that, the interview in and of itself is not really
Right.
going to get you what you need to feel comfortable that we're making the right decision here, which is a really big one. So I would be a proponent of doing a site visit of, the ultimate
Final
last couple of
candidate, yeah.
candidates as a starting point. And then, obviously, we can change our minds if we think that that's not necessary, because, we certainly don't want to, it's not
Well,
like we
just
got
to give you
losing
some
time here.
perspective on it, the final round, we have second round for May 22nd, right?
Right.
So the site visit would have to be like May 24th, or, it needs to be quick.
Quickly.
So this is why Don is saying, hey, you kind of need to know, because you got to be
Because
quick
what's
on your
going on
feet.
for them then too, if you think
Right.
about what's
Yeah.
going on in schools
Right.
then. So you don't have to decide tonight. To Rod's point about feeling it, you're gonna know a lot more. I mean, honestly, we do references and we give you homework different than, that's just a difference in I think what other search firms do. So you're gonna get a lot more exposure and you'll know then if you feel like you need more information or not.
Okay.
You'll feel it. I think you will, but that's the perspective of it. And the other thing I would say, and I know Donna kind of said this, I would generally not try to visit two candidates. You're going through the process, and you're gonna boil down to one, and then you want to validate. So kind of what Mr. Young said, you're kind of validating what you think you've heard, and that's what you're doing with the site. If you try to do two site visits, you're going to basically validate two, and then you're still not going to have a decision.
Okay.
You see what I mean? You're not getting discernible information in those situations generally, I would say.
I'm sorry, Mr. Muckman.
Is there a downside to not doing it, or to doing this?
It's timing, and there are some downsides to it in regard to just getting the process completed, but obviously, the more information you have, the better. Just depends on the feel of the situation at the end.
When I think about a board I worked with recently, a couple of the long-serving board members they felt like, not this time, but previously when they went, they were intentionally trying to get rid of somebody.
They were
trying to get rid of
screen them
somebody.
Oh.
So and so that's the
They
kind
weren't
of,
getting good information there either.
yeah, like they were getting intentionally good information when really there was probably some things that if they were having a candid conversation. So those are the kinds of things. But I think what's important now is that we know we need to have that as a real potential and also let candidates know at that point in time.
We'll be ready for it.
Okay, I think it's just, if you're saying it comes clearer as we go through the process, that will help all of us.
Yeah.
I think we just want to make sure we've done our due diligence to
For
make
sure.
sure that we,
I think Trustee Johnson.
Mr.
Yeah, I'm just, just based on this, I'm just really not a fan of that, and I'll just say my piece briefly. We are sending 2, at most 3 board members. That means that they are getting their eyes on things that other people aren't.
Right. That's one disadvantage, with speaking to Mr. Akamos.
And the other part of that comes down to, it's lack of a better term, it's Hollywood. Of course, the lights are gonna be shining, everything's gonna be scripted, and I don't wanna see scripted, I wanna see, real life. And
Okay.
that's just my thoughts.
All
so.
right.
Okay, well, if you are in a good place on interviews for now, for this moment, we'll switch over now and focus, Dr. Green will focus on interview questions. And then we'll visit interviews again right before we're done tonight, just to make sure, because it's gonna get very real. Once we do interview questions and you choose candidates, you're gonna be like, oh, yep, this is happening. So we'll visit it one more time then, okay?
Okay, so at your seat, you've got a draft of some questions, I think, everyone. So I've got 23 on here. And I would say we probably don't necessarily want 23. We might want like 19. I do try to usually stick to 20. Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt, and maybe you'll cover this, but in case you don't, has there ever been a practice of, we talked about submitting questions ahead of time, just so that people know what they are and can be prepared to speak to them, but has there ever been an opportunity for candidates to prepare written responses in advance for us to take a look at?
Yes.
Yeah, for like one question or something, not for the whole group.
No, but, so, that is a reasonable possibility, with the understanding that you will all assess that information differently.
Right.
So there was a time that we used to do a written piece for every first round interview. They'd go in another room and do it right before their interview. And I found that unless we're going to do the work, for you guys to understand what you're looking for in that written response, that it just created kind of more distortion. If there's something that you can agree to that you want to ask, we could have them kind of do that ahead of time and you'd have it reviewed. But it would, to Dr. Green's point, it would only be like one. Does that get to your question?
It does. I'm just conscious of the fact that, I don't know for the rest of my colleagues, but I know I have a lot of questions. And I know that this is a really important decision, and it would be helpful if I had more than what I got in their packet. Yeah, I didn't have enough yet in the packet that got me the evidence that I'm looking for, the star situations, that kind of stuff. And I wondered whether I could get some of that from our top candidates in advance to reduce the amount of time perhaps for the interview questioning, or to prevent good questions from our board members from getting cut off.
Sure. Well, one of the things to remember in this is that once those names become public, many things, such as the status of their current districts, what has student achievement been in those districts, that kind of information, of course, is going to be public and considerable at that point in time. I'm only saying that because I think that might be some of the things that you're thinking about. So that in itself, there'll be a lot of disclosure that just happens through natural research. The other thing, let's see how we do on questions, and we'll talk about, and how many folks you want to interview, because then we can talk about how much time. I think our original conversation was something like 50 minutes.
55.
Okay. And so we'll go from there, accordingly. If you figure roughly 3 minutes, an answer, is that what you figured?
Yeah, I kind of usually think about 20 questions and 55 minutes, so a little bit less than 3 minutes a question. And I mean, yes, there's tons of questions. I mean, we could have 100 questions, and you can't. It just is not practical. But what we want to try to do is we want to try to get on the big issues of the day. Now, the second round, you get another shot at it. So as she said in the first round, we're going to do generally the same questions to everybody. But then the second round, we can switch it up. So we want to know a little bit more about this person. We want to know a little bit more about this. And we'll ask you for 2 or 3 questions for each person, kind of a thing. That's what I usually do for that second round. So there's multiple shots at this, I guess is what I'd be saying. So, so the fact that we're doing this kind of an open here, generally what we would do is Pam, Miss Green, I'm not sure what call you, President Green, Madam President. We'll start out, right? She's going to start out and welcome the person. So the person's going to come in. And are we doing the interviews here? Did we decide that?
We talked about putting the table up here so
Little
that
closer?
when they panned, they could pan everything.
Like the candidates sitting here? Okay, so when they come in, we'll have them shake your hand, take their seat, you'll welcome them, right? And then you'll say, thank you for coming in tonight. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this position? That's a little bit of like an opener. So the candidates are expecting like an opening statement, right? So that's their moment to take 2 minutes to talk a little bit about themselves, their career, their personal situation. So then from there, we usually would go round robin on the questions. So I would generally start over here with Ms. Weems, and then we'd go in order accordingly. And so then we would list, like question number 1 would be Terry. So in this particular question, it's about, developing a leadership team, right? And so that's important for the size of the district, the administrators that you have, that type of thing. So what I'm kind of looking for, and I don't want to spend too much time because I know we have to get into some other things here, but I'm generally looking for do you like these questions and do you think they hit at what you want to hit at? So this is a shot to just say, Terry, would you think that first one was good, and is that a reasonable opener? And so then she says yes, then I'm going to put Terry's name on that question, and then we're going to put it in an interview guide, and then we're going to go forward from that. Rich would be the next one, and Terry's the next one, and so on and so forth. Does that make sense? So what I'm kind of looking for is input on these questions. So do you like number 1, do you guys like that one? You want to stick with it, and then as you're looking through, this is what I'm kind of doing with all of these. Do you like number 2? Do you want to talk about that, or is there something more specific you would like about that? You see what I mean? Do you like number 3? It's a little bit different. So we're trying to get at, remember that criteria that we did? Remember this thing here? So we're trying to get at some of these things with these questions. And so if you have one of these, let me give you this.
Yes, thank you.
And honestly, if we, you've got one. You do have one. Back. You have one.
So like a way to look at it is to scan through all of the questions, take a minute, read through. Then the first question is anything missing? Because if you know that you're going to ask for something to be added, then we have to start striking, right? And so.
Yeah, so can we take a moment to kind of scan through and what am I missing? I've got several different things in here in regard to the criteria. I put one in about the foundation. It's 21. I put one in about tough decisions. There's the one that Terry was mentioning earlier about, becoming a part of the community. How, the question is, how will you become part of the community? You leave it kind of open. You see the difference between saying, are you going to move in, or how would you become part of the community? You see the difference in that? So we're trying to let the candidates respond. Yes?
Just the way some of these are phrased, going back to what Donna mentioned earlier about compound questions.
Yes.
Like, for example, number 1, describe your leadership, well, am I allowed to read?
Yeah, go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Nobody cares. Yes, they do, but go ahead.
Probably not, it's okay. Describe your leadership approach in developing an administrative team from your experience, so that starts a second question there. And I look at a couple of them, it appears that we're asking the compound questions that you don't want us to ask.
Which one's related though? Like that's pretty tight if you.
So she was just talking in general, a lot of questions are going to be like that. So in this particular question, you're really giving them some direction, a little more direction with the second part of the question. So it's tell what steps you took and what challenges you encountered. So that gives them some frame. So as you think about an interviewee, they're hearing you, and it helps them sometimes to hear a little bit more. What we don't want to have happen is for them to say, what do you mean by that? And when I coach people that are interviewing, I say, don't ask what they mean, because they're trying to get what you think is what is trying to happen here. So the board is asking a general question, and your response is what they're looking for, not what they are looking for, if you get what I'm saying there. So I wouldn't worry about the compoundness. If you see where it gets 4 or 5 lines, then yeah, you're going to be concerned about it. But generally, they're going to be a little more complex than like number 16. Pretty straightforward. I used to have a question about, I've used before, like, how do you build consensus? So everybody's always surprised at how short it is. But it's a great question, And so sometimes what I like to do is mix it up with a little bit longer questions, some shorter questions, kind of keep the thing a little bit varied. Pam.
So Brad, question number 3, without stating the whole question. So our district has a plan already.
Yep.
So we're asking how they would establish one, but is that the right verbiage when we have one?
Maybe not.
We still
So,
want,
yeah, you
or
could-
how would they enhance or work with?
Yeah,
or-
absolutely. So you could absolutely change that up and say, yeah, we don't want to send that message.
How would you go about implementing?
Right, that's
Yeah.
it. It's more about implementation of, or enhancing.
absolutely.
Because I don't want to see
So
them
that's
think they're
actually
going to
what I'm
start
looking
us all
for.
over again.
That's what I'm looking for from you guys, is help me change a few of these, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, because obviously you can tell me later as well, but that one would be more of, how would you implement this one, or how would you enhance?
Enhance. And using our current data, using our current structures, how would you move that forward?
Yes.
Um,
What else
Are
comes
you
to
good
mind?
on, do I need to give you more
No, I've
feedback,
got
or
it.
you've got notes?
I've got
You're
that
good?
one. I've
Okay.
got that one. Yeah, I'm really,
How much more should I say?
I'm really quick on this stuff. Not really, but yeah, no, I got it. And that's what I'm looking for on any of these. So what strikes you, like number 4 is one in particular that there was a lot of discussion about that with stakeholders, right? So number 5 is a little more general, so I mean, that's possible that, hey, maybe you don't want that one.
Ron, I'm going to go to number 4 because you've captured the essence, but the secondary piece that I want to make sure is someplace is how do we listen to or include student voice?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because that's been a real important piece of the work
Is
that
that
we
a
do.
standalone question about student voice in general?
So
though?
that's what I'm wondering as
Yeah,
I'm reading.
I think that's a different question.
How do we
different
engage
concept.
and,
Yeah.
So we'll park that.
Yeah,
question.
that's another
And then we'll
question.
see what we can kind of.
It's like
get off this
4.5.
list. A lot of times, once you look over them a minute, you start to be like, oh, this one's, seems a little repetitive, or let's change that.
Options like that part could be a little bit on the 16 as well. Just the student input.
Yeah, that's a little bit different than that. In terms of that, of course, the listening to student voice is more of a stakeholder input type thing. This is more of an approach to what do you think about education, your philosophy on education.
Right.
So somebody might be more on, hey, the core is the most important thing, test results. This is getting at what about the rest of the child. See what I mean? So I put that in there because of your arts and your, there's a lot more to education than just test scores. That's why that one's in there.
21, I would add the word education before foundation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty solid, right? It's a pretty big thing.
But if you just use
So
foundation,
I'm
it
not
doesn't
trying to get
clarify.
anybody in trouble, I'm just asking questions, yeah. Right. Don't kill the messenger. But is that worth taking, I mean, is that issue
Is that a
important enough
question?
here to take a first round? And it could be, I know there's some dynamic there.
I don't personally think so. I mean, I
agree.
think that, you
Because
know,
if so, then we
Yeah.
know that we, you know, because we
No.
already know we got a first.
I
round
also thought that we could take 17 off. I think that our board will determine that direction. I mean, that comes from us.
I disagree with that. I'd like to know the person's thoughts on that. I mean, I understand you're saying that comes from us. The person may say they set that tone.
I wouldn't expect that, but I would want to understand more about what their relationships have been in the past, and I would expect that we're already going to get that in the information that came in our packets, was my thought. If
I
we're,
think it might be about changing the wording on that question.
Yeah.
I'm
I
thinking as
agree.
well.
Yeah.
Because it's probably the PD reference that's.
Yeah, you don't need the
I
second,
agree.
you don't need the last part of that.
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah.
more about the first part. In
Yeah.
fact,
Yep.
I actually noticed that when John and I were.
It's the
Yeah.
working relationship
Right.
component you're getting.
Right,
to.
right.
So we'll adjust that.
Is everybody good with 21
That's
as
what I was
that
just
being
gonna
an option?
Yeah,
I-
that's fine.
Cancel 21? Okay.
Because you can definitely do a
Yeah.
deep dive on that in a second.
17 rewording?
I would like to see 17 reworded.
Yep, I can do that.
Okay.
And I'm gonna take out the PD portion of that.
Great.
That makes sense.
So it's more about the working relationship communication.
Right.
What about the last two, like 22 and 23?
just-
Those are kind of hot button. They're a little bit hot button issues, but obviously they're last because I kind of thought of them last. And I'm not sure that they're really in here, and I'm not sure that they're that important. But I know they're important, but you see what I'm saying? So what's anyone's thought on that?
So I was thinking when I read 22, it's more about how is their communication through those venues or those methods? What do they use to communicate with all stakeholders?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very appropriate question to kind of know is what's their style for
Right.
how they're going to engage and communicate throughout all of our stakeholders.
Yeah, and then they might mention the other thing.
Right.
All right, I like that.
Any other thoughts on that one, Mr.
No, on
Johnson?
23, I'll.
Yes, let's move to 23, go ahead.
Okay, 23.
Take that one off? Was that your-
We're going to get some thoughts here.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr.
I like the
Johnson?
question, but I would, tell us your thoughts on school safety and security. What are they gonna say?
Yeah,
You know, I mean,
it's
obviously.
important.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see it narrowed down a little or either taken out. Maybe it's a question for the second round.
I was thinking second round question makes a little more sense,
Yeah.
especially
I
when we
agree
have some
too.
other
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
questions that I think
Yeah,
are
let's,
Absolutely.
first round.
let's cancel that one. I kind of feel the
I
same
like
way.
that for the second.
So 22, I'm going to change to more like communication with all stakeholders. 21 and 23 are out.
We're going to take 23, Rod, and try to put it in the second round.
Yeah.
So hold it, but phrase it appropriately for second round.
So I'm going to surface an issue with question 14.
Yeah. Lay it on me.
Is it really about all?
It
Maybe
is.
Students.
Pardon?
Is it about
Just
closing
be
the gaps?
Well, that's my, are there two different things that we need to explore? Is that too generic? You know, I just want to understand what's going to get you the specificity you need.
I'd like to hear something about, oh, I'm sorry, Jess, you had your hand up. As soon as I started speaking.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'd like to know how they would handle the achievement gap as well.
Is it more about the gaps as opposed to this generic? This is a little more generic. I'm sorry,
Mr. Rich, sorry,
Ms. Cummings
Mrs. Cummings was first, Mrs. Cummings.
So I actually am looking at number 12 and 14 together because I think that's part of the interview process, is let's hear what they have to say. My view is we don't necessarily need to lead them to exactly the answer we're looking for.
So maybe if they don't mention it,
Right, let's just
They
hear
haven't
what they have to
researched
say
that.
and what.
That's a good
Not
point.
just- It's not just that. The other issue is question 12s. I mean, you're all going to have a different opinion about what the right answer is.
Right.
Right.
And none of them will have had the opportunity to gather real insider information at that point. So I think it creates a possible distortion just in your own deliberations. I know that may seem weird to hear, but
Mr. Rich?
So two things on that. I think 12 might also be a good one for
Second round.
possibly
two.
second round. But then back to 14, I think one thing that was brought up is what is included in the word all, and allowing them to tell us what that means to them, because that then lets us start to differentiate candidates.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's what yeah.
Mrs. Weems?
I tend to think of number 12 as a way to start to differentiate between candidates personally. So I'd like to keep that as a first round, only because I'd like to use the second round as an opportunity to drill down, especially if we're not asking follow-up questions, is the thought. And then as it relates to 14, I like the word all students personally, because I feel like we've got something in number 4 that helps us, and maybe we can expand that to be not just with respect to hiring practices, but across the, through to our students.
Mr. Johnson?
I'm concerned about 14 and the word all, simply because if the candidate doesn't pick up the word all, he or she is answering something completely different. How would you improve our, how would you help our district improve student academic for, and they're already thinking in their head how to answer, and they don't hear the word all. You're going to get a completely different answer unless we have an emphasis on the word all, whoever is asking that question.
Okay.
Mrs. Weems?
I think we have a need to address student achievement for all of our students. And so I can't imagine not asking a future superintendent that question.
Okay. And Pam, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I'm looking at that as almost a three-pronged type of thing. So you've got what has been their prior success in addressing student achievement or achievement gap. So what have they, in their leadership role, done with that? And then, and I'm not sure where that falls, whether it's round 2 or whatever, but it is, what would they do with our achievement gap? I think that's more of it. But overall student improvement approaches, what are some of their insights? So almost, I think what Mrs. Weems is saying, you have that first layer, and maybe round 2, we dig deeper, and they've had a chance to look at our data as well, and look at that gap and start to
I think, I'm just going to, I think in the first round, you're much better off to try to get a real handle on their skill sets. So what have they done? Understanding that whether we're talking about 14 in student achievement or we're talking about 12, which is a broader answer, there's a couple of things that you may not realize. First of all, the perception of your district is different than the reality of your district. Okay? So that's real for all these people. Do they need to do their homework? Yeah, they better do their homework. But they're also not going to get the job by sitting in a public meeting bashing the district. Haven't seen anybody get the job that way yet. Just going to tell you that. So they're on pins and needles when they get tricksy kind of questions, right? Because they know this is being televised,
Right.
So, with the time that you have, I would be wanting to get a handle on what's their track record,
That's
what do they claim that they've done, and then the next round, try to get more, okay, so how does that apply here? What do you, based on the research you've done in the district, what are some of the first things you tackle, or something like that? I don't
Yeah.
know, I contradict
No,
you.
no. I think that's right. And honestly, the answer you get a lot of times with this type of question is what they've done. But we could be a little more specific and say, tell us how you've helped your district or in your, in your past, with student academic achievement for all students.
Right,
No, I agree with you. The first round is more their track record, what they've done, and then they try to weave in how they're going to bring that here. Second round is more of what are you going to do here. You can definitely see that train moving that way.
Because Donna's words just kind of sparked my head with, what do your first 90 days look like in relationship to curriculum instruction? And maybe that's a second round question.
That is a
We dig
second
in
round. I
deeper.
think that's
Make
a
that a
second round.
presentation.
Yeah, because to me, that is going to be so insightful.
Yeah, no, that's
What are their
definitely
steps and what are they
something
doing?
we'd be looking for second round.
Okay.
But that one I agree with, if people are okay with, phrase it more for how have they done this in the past?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And then I'll phrase that more for that way.
Yeah.
So, are we agreeable to keep both 12 and 14? Let the chips fall? Is there anything else
I would just
that?
ask that you emphasize, make sure the word all is emphasized, whoever's asking that question, so that they
Absolutely.
hear it.
Any other questions you think we can drop? Anything that you look at, you're like, hey, not seeing this one. Rich?
Number 6 looks to me a little generic,
All right,
so I don't know.
all in favor?
Aye.
Dropping it, boom, done. Dropping the mic on that one. Thanks, Rich. Good job.
I want to go back to question.
I didn't say I wanted to drop
I'm not
necessarily.
that board member that goes
I'm
back to
looking
the
to
same
drop a
issue, but,
couple.
so if you guys are gonna keep 12, can I suggest that you reframe it so that it says, you know, tell us about a challenge that you've helped a district get through that you're particularly proud of or something? Because
Right.
I'm just saying, if they have to talk about a challenge in Farmington,
It's tough.
it
Yeah.
becomes, they put a target on themselves the minute they do that.
Right.
They should be courageous. I don't want you to think that I don't think candidates should be courageous, but this is just a difficult environment, first time walking in to demonstrate courage when they want the job. So can we come up with a revision that takes a little heat off of that?
Yep, and I think, I'm sorry, Mrs. Cummings, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I think that makes sense because it gives them an opportunity to talk about something
Right.
that they've
Right.
accomplished.
That's right.
And I would assume in that situation, I'm not sure how much.
So more of a
Here,
challenge that they've addressed.
Right, that they faced.
Yep, tell us about a
That might be
time that
relevant here
you
in Farmington.
faced a
you.
challenge and led a school
Challenge that
district
they've
through with
addressed.
the outcome.
All right, got it.
Because they could be the perfect candidate for us, but we don't want them to be attacked in the park.
Yeah, and, no, I think that's good. So
Mr.
it looks
Johnson-
to me
Mr.
like
Johnson
I
had a
have,
question, Ron.
I'm sorry, yes, Terry.
What about 19? Would that be a second round, more of a in-depth?
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, let's put that to the second round.
Because I really like that question, but I
I do
definitely
too.
think it's a second round one.
So how many questions are we looking to have in this first
So
round?
I would say about 19 or 20, and I've got 19 right now. I've cut out 4. I've cut out 6, 21, and 23. And 19. 6, 19, 21, and 23.
You don't count the welcome as a question?
I don't really count the welcome as a question, so that's number 20. That's number 20. Because it is really, it takes up time, but I don't usually number it. Because it's, it's just Miss Green, and we're just like, hey,
Okay, so
intro.
like, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, one last one that seems very big picture would be number 20 as well. If we're just getting to know them, wouldn't that be I'm just asking,
Well, if they say 1-to-1, you're like,
Great, how are you gonna fund that?
well, you just sometimes.
Yeah, we could put in there and explain how you will fund it.
yeah, there you go.
Before you button it up, so I'm just gonna throw some things out so that, what I don't want you to do is get in the car at the end of the day and be like, So like Dispro's not on here.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry, what?
Dispro, so the disproportionate number of African-American students that are disciplined as opposed to.
Oh,
They've
discipline.
been cited for that.
Discipline.
So is that the elephant in the room that you just want to know their experience or their familiarity with that? Is that a second round? I'm trying to figure out, are there any kind of issues in this space that we haven't done a deep
Yeah, I don't
enough?
think it's first either. I agree.
Second
Anybody
round?
feeling first round?
My initial feeling was second round.
Yeah, I think
That's
that's
Yeah, that's
most
fine.
of us, yeah.
Okay,
I'm with second round.
Ms. Weems had her hand up.
I want to let you finish your thoughts.
no, that's good. I'm good.
This is a great list, and I like the way we've weeded it down. I wonder, though, if we take a look at what we said was in our
Yeah,
search criteria,
let's
if
do that.
we're confident that we've got everything that we want represented here. And
Yeah, look this over.
for me, even as I was going through the resumes and the packets, I was trying to, pull out, I'm personally looking for, we've done a lot of work in the right sizing area, and I'm really focused more on curriculum, instruction, emerging trends, innovation, that sort of thing, and I don't see that here as much. And
Well,
I wonder
maybe
whether
20
they're.
could be turned into that type of question, Terry.
Yes,
Because that is meant to
Yes.
be that.
not limited to technology, but more
Yeah,
broadly.
right.
Right.
And then definitely bumping it up in the order so that it's not at risk of being cut off.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and this is not necessarily the order, although I appreciate what you're saying, because that's probably what I'll do is copy and paste, but I can definitely change the order up a little bit.
And
So we
five
can
can be
move up.
adjusted to better reflect that. If you're looking for something like, how you, utilize research-based practices to improve.
Yes.
If that's where you're looking to go.
Yeah, let's
And
bump that one
five is a little
up.
mundane for you, then that can certainly be beefed up.
Yeah, let's change that. Instead of long-term initiative, let's talk about research-based practices to improve instruction.
And we'll get another copy of these, right?
Yes.
You're
gonna get it in the packet.
ahead of time, we'll send you the PDF. You
Okay.
have to make a copy, but we'll send it to you ahead of time.
And I'll bounce it off of Donna too before so we'll confer about it to make sure we've got it. But, and so number 5, I'll change to more research-based practices to improve instruction. But then remember, 22, I changed to more about all stakeholders, communication with all stakeholders, right, as opposed to just one part. And then 20, more about innovation. And so is that one about improving student learning? Is it an innovation one, or is it emerging trends? Help me out on that one a little bit.
I think looking at innovations on student learning is extremely important because we've had innovations in the way courses are taught and the different things that we have overall for our district. So,
And leave out the operations, right? Focus
I think
more
for
on
this
student
part.
learning.
Right.
All right, and then I'll move that one up the list. And that really is pretty good. I think that gives us 19, and we'll make sure we're not making them too complex either, for just that aspect of the interview process.
And a side note, it looks like Michael Rice is the next state superintendent.
Does it? Does it?
Was a 5-3 vote?
Oh, my word. Well, that's exciting. Okay, anything else on questions? You feeling pretty good about it? I'll get this done in a couple days. We'll confer, and then we'll get it to Kim and get it out to you guys. And then if we have problems, we can always adjust, just as long as we do it before next week. All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, but do you mind if I sit over there for the
No,
next
you're
part,
fine.
and then you can stay there?
All right.
That's your water there. I'm kidding.
Oh, thank you.
yeah.
We're doing good on time.
This, oddly enough, this next section usually goes kind of quickly. I know that seems counterintuitive, but generally, that is because the cream rises to the top.
Donna, can I just state some of the
Sure.
demographic that we talked about? I'll restate it at our next meeting, but we did have 29 applicants. And I think that's important to know as we enter into this. I'll be a little bit more specific during our board meeting under my report, but I think it was important to let people that are here know we had 29 applications.
Great. And so, one of the things that Madam President clarified with me is that whole beginning part of the memo that you received with the demographic reporting, that's appropriate to be shared, so there's no issue
And I
with
will
that.
do that.
Okay, I just wanted to have this up in case I needed it. Okay, so in the recommendations that Dr. Green and I had sent, what we had asked of you is that you would review all those materials. That's some light reading, huh?
180 pages.
I know, it's a lot. It's crazy a lot. That's why when you're like, there wasn't enough, I was like, okay. You're that student. But we wanted you to come forward with 5, each of you to begin the conversation. And so how that works is we will soft poll you and get the 5 from each of you. We'll tally the soft poll, and then we'll focus our conversation around those candidates that presented the strongest interest, the strongest support from the board to begin with. Now, before someone asks, let me be clear. At this point, it behooves you each to give me 5. So if I get to one of you and you're like, well, Donna, I really want to give 4, I'm going to say I want 5, because it's an imbalance in the count. So if you can't all get to 5, then we need to agree on 4 right now. And so, can you show me the thumbs up if you all can give me 5?
I've got a thumbs up on that one.
That's great. Oh, we have a
got your
couple.
thumb up,
You cannot.
Jessica?
That's okay.
Oh,
And so- That's okay. That's why I'm asking.
More.
It's not my first rodeo, right? I've seen this before. So you're comfortable at 4 right now. Do you mind my asking if you, what are you comfortable at 4? Are you
She said
comfortable?
She says she's got more.
More.
More
Oh,
than 5.
oh.
We were very fortunate.
Yes, we were.
I was very impressed reading through you said 180 pages, because I lost track.
400.
400.
Oh, see, it's 100, 400, so I'll do it. I'll do it. 4?
Okay.
4, yeah.
All right, can you extend to 5?
Let me explain. It doesn't mean, that's not the number that we're going to interview, okay? But if I get the same kind of consistent number from all of you, then we at least know where genuine interest is. If there's some kind of disequilibrium in that, then it becomes, well, I would have done that person, or I would have, it just gets, and that may still be part of the conversation, but do you want us to give you a minute to think about that? Because you can take that minute. That's a better, okay. So for the rest of you, take a few minutes and write the application, the applicant number down of your 5 so that you have that ready. No, yeah, I'm not asking for a ranking.
Okay.
So I like numerical order best. You don't have to do it that
Oh,
way.
you want to put them in the right order?
I will, but
Anybody
The order
need-
from the sheet is the easiest, the order from the sheet.
You need paper?
I have both ways.
Yeah, go for it. Oh, you do them in real order?
I do, because it
Yeah.
just doesn't always, so I have it both ways, it doesn't matter. See? Oh. So if you want to take this one,
Don't make
that's fine. Just don't leave it in. Are you okay? Are you just making fun of me for how weird I am? Oh. Even I have those.
Yeah, so I.
That's when it's purifying.
This is correct.
Yeah.
Oh, my word, yeah, that's good.
Do we pass them down to you?
No, I'm going to have you read them off.
We're gonna read them out. Yeah.
I'm going to have you read them off in just a second. That's fine. Just take a second. Make sure that we get everybody the same level of comfort. You did have a lot of practicing superintendents. Surprising.
13. Either previous or prior, or current.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so at this point, it's not important to me that I associate particular numbers with particular board members, because this is just a softball. But I also understand that it can be a little nerve-wracking to be the first one, so I like to ask the board president to do that.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Thanks.
Leadership in difficult times and all
Great.
that, right?
Put the pressure on her.
And so.
It is pressure because you want to make it's such an important decision.
It is. So if you'll audit me, just to make sure
Yes.
we end up at the same count,
Absolutely.
that'll be fantastic. All right, I'm ready when you are.
All right, I put them in order. 408, 1005, 1485.
I'm going to ask you to slow down just a
Sorry.
little bit. Okay?
1780,
Okay?
1959.
Okay. Thank you. Are you ready, Dr. Green?
I'm just gonna read them back to you. I had 1959, 1005, 1780, 1485, and 408. All right,
That kind of felt like bingo there.
yeah,
Bingo!
you won.
Okay. And so we'll go to the left or right. I don't know which of you are ready. Okay, thank you.
I have 973,
Thank you.
52,
Thank you.
1959,
Thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4,
Thank you.
and 1624.
Thank you.
Got it.
Okay, just checking.
Mr. Muckmell?
I have 1959, 1485,
Thank you,
408,
thank you.
1005,
Thank
and
you.
1780.
Got it.
Thank you.
Mrs. Weems?
I have 1959,
Thank you,
1005,
thank you,
1780,
thank you.
You're okay.
1624,
Thank you,
and 1485.
Got it.
thank you.
You ready for the next?
Yep.
Mrs. Smith?
I have 408,
Thank you,
1959, 174, 249, 1526.
All right, I need the last three. 174. And then what?
249,
249.
1526.
1526. Got it.
So do you have 408 and 1959?
Yes, 408, 1959. Yep.
Mr. Rich?
52,
thank you,
408,
thank you,
973,
thank you,
1959,
thank you,
1992.
thank you.
Mrs. Cummings?
Just hang on just 1 second. I didn't get the 1992. Oh, there it is. Got it. Thank you.
So much easier my way.
Yeah. You're smarty. All right.
Mrs.
Ready?
Cummings?
52,
Thank you,
408,
thank you,
973,
thank you,
and 1780.
thank you.
I think that was
Do
just
we need
four.
one
You
more?
got one more.
It was just four.
Oh, sorry, it's going to be, oh no, it's going to be in order. 1959.
Okay, so I'm going to read off all of them from a tally perspective so that
Okay.
you can check my numbers.
Yep.
And I'm going to read them off in numerical order.
Got it.
So I'll wait for you.
Absolutely.
So 52, 3,
Yep.
174, 1,
Okay.
249, 1, 408, 5,
Got it.
973, 3,
Got it.
1005, 3,
Yep.
1234, 1,
Yep.
1485, 3,
Yep.
1526, oh, I skipped one. No, I didn't, okay. 1526, 1.
Yep.
1624, 2.
Got it.
1780, 4.
Yep.
1959, 7.
Got it.
And 1992, 1.
Got it.
Okay. So, here's how we like to walk through this. So, candidate 1959 that had 7, initial expressions of interest, it seems like just practical that we would reserve that person and we will likely offer that person an interview. So I'm going to jot that one off to the side. It's nothing official yet. We're still in, kind of having a conversation around this. And then when we look at candidate 408 that had 5, it would make sense that we kind of park that one over for a potential interview. And I think then we go to the 4s, is that right, where we're at?
Yeah, and I might, at this point, ask them to re-vote again, just voting for people that actually had more than one vote. I don't know, I know you've probably done it differently than I've done it, but, and I'm not sure when you like to have them vote again, like, how do you get above 3 and 2 and stuff for some of these, because there's some that just have one vote.
Yeah, that's the
Sorry.
one we're talking about.
Yeah, one had 4 already.
Which one was that?
1780?
Yeah.
But
I'm happy to, I'm just going to tell you where I'm going, and then we can
Yeah, go
we can
ahead.
revisit this. I think if we, and I'm going to explain why, so if the board's not comfortable with it, then we can have a conversation. You're not going to hurt my feelings. You wouldn't believe the things that have been said about me.
Stand in line.
I know. It's just a hazard of the job, really. So if we tentatively said that the candidate that got 4 votes, 1780, we were going to reserve, then we look at where we are. We have 2 candidates then that had 3 votes of, initial votes of interest. Are you on the same page with me?
yes.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, I have 3 that have 3 votes.
I also have 3.
Okay, probably haven't gotten that.
Three.
Or 4, you're right.
All
No,
right, so
there were
that's what I
4.
just need to check on.
Yeah.
So that would be 52, 973, 105. I got to find my third.
1005.
Right.
Yeah.
1005. There you go. 1, 2, 3. No, I'm still missing one.
And
1485.
1485. 1485.
Yeah.
And all of those have 4 votes?
They all have 3.
Three.
They all have 3.
Oh, they all have 3?
Right.
What about 1780? 3 votes?
That one had 4.
That one had 4,
Okay.
And 408 had 5, right?
right?
Okay.
Yep. So, we're just talking. This is nothing but a conversation. We don't all have to be in agreement. Facilitation frameworks can change, so just breathe a little bit with me on this, okay?
We're breathing.
I know, I always do this. People are always like, oh, she's so funny, but just because I know sometimes people get, so one option would be that, we just include those top 7 in interviews. Because if we include the 4 3s, that gets us to 7. Now, what we're talking about here is your time.
Right.
And so, if that's a place that you're like, Donna,
Can you remind us what the recommendation was? Was it 5?
it was 5 to 7.
5 to 7.
It was 5 to 7.
I'm good with that.
I'm good with 7. This
Me
is a
too.
big decision.
Yeah.
I'd like to
Yeah.
see.
I agree.
Rather err on the side of casting the net and
Do you have any concerns about that course of action?
No.
Okay, let
I
me
mean,
read off the numbers.
The only question I was thinking, and I don't know if you want to go into this at all, but someone that had 2 votes, there's one other one that had 2 votes, and I just wondered if anybody wanted to discuss the difference between 3 and 2s, if that was worthy of discussion or not.
Does anybody feel like a candidate that got 2 votes,
That they were strong
that
about
they
something.
feel really strongly about, that they want to go ahead and vote on?
I'm looking at Jessica's face.
She wants to add an 8.
You want to interview them
She
all?
does want to add.
Because the next step would be we would take the 3 that have 3 and the 2 that have 2
and try to vote to get those.
I think we have 4 that have 3 and only 1 that has 2.
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, it could be,
I think
I'm
we
just
have a
kind of
cutoff
tossing it
there.
out there. I don't want to muck up anything, but it feels like there's 5 that had some interest, and I didn't know if people wanted to, like, vote for 3 out of 5 and see what that looked like. I'm not sure what people would do
So
on
he's
something
asking,
like
are we
that.
comfortable with staying with our 3s, our 4s, and our 5s?
I think that depends on how people feel about the one that got the 2.
I'm comfortable with what we have.
You're good?
I'm good.
Mr.
Yeah,
Markmo?
yeah.
Just with
No,
the
I'm
top-
good, I'm good with
The
what we
top
have.
7?
You good?
Yeah,
The top
looks like
7?
the top 7.
You sure?
Before we finalize that, I mean, conversation is warranted, we've not voted, and there's no motion on the floor, this is still kind of workshop format. And so, let's just look at the candidates that are in the mix, let's make sure we all are, looking at the exact same folks, right? And so we would be talking about, 1959, right? 408. 1780. Okay. Now, moving to that next bunch, I feel like I'm weird on this. That next bunch, this is the group of 3s that we're talking about. 52, 973, 1005, and 1485. So, I'm going to be candid. I'm thinking that if there is a question in this, it's that one of these folks is in a pretty small district. And so, that's probably the dimension in this mix, as opposed to one of those folks that got 2 that's in a district that maybe has some similar populations that you have as far as serving. I'm not surfacing that to persuade you. I'm simply saying, look at that realistically, because sometimes I feel like I sound jaded. I definitely don't want to sound that way. But having looked at thousands of feedback forms from constituents, sometimes a district like this, if somebody's coming from a pretty small district, that's the staff struggles with that. So I want you to have your eyes wide open, interview who you want to interview. The same thing when we think about a smaller district but a similar student population, right? Anybody in proximity, there's always going to be a lot of chatter about. I think you've had some experience with that already, right? Mm-hmm. And so I want you to, have your eyes wide open on that, so that you don't feel like you wasted a slot or used it differently. Like, I want you to look at each of these candidates now. If you need to look at their resumes again, just so that you are all in, then let's do that. Do you have additional perspective?
No, I agree with what you're saying, and there's also one of the candidates that is, that got 4 votes, is from a small school as well, and that one's out of state. But I wasn't sure what the perspective of,
But it's 85% minority.
yeah. So there's
So-
definitely some, some things to think about there. But yeah, 7 is certainly a doable number for interviews.
Can we, now that we've narrowed it down to these 7, can we look at them again?
That's what I'm suggesting
Okay.
you do right now.
Okay.
Yeah, she's saying do it right now,
Right.
in case you have any
I would take a
questions.
minute and look at each of those, so that if you want to ask a question or seek clarification, insofar as if we have information, then we're happy to be useful in that.
So, we're taking a look at these again for the purpose of determining whether we're confident that these are the ones that we want to proceed with, or to identify whether we had any questions on any.
Both of those pieces, yes.
I can tell you I'm comfortable, we, as a board, we have voted on this, and it seems to capture what people, a small minority, at the very least, which are 3 people, would want. So I'm comfortable.
Good.
I'm comfortable as well. I do have a lot of questions, but I don't think that they're going to be, that an answer to the question would preclude me from having any of the 7 on the list.
Yeah,
Okay?
I agree with you.
I'm in a good place. I'm in a real good place.
I'm good with it.
I'm good.
Great. What we would do then, when we're ready, is we'd entertain a motion to extend an invitation to interview for those 7 candidates. I'll read off the numbers again if necessary, and then we can have further discussion after it's seconded if you'd like.
Can I ask a question
Yep.
before we do that?
Yep.
Sure.
When could we get answers to questions like, more specifics on the size of a district, or experience with a bond, or gaps in experience?
We can give you general answers to things like size of district right now. That's why I wanted to kind of surface that point, because I didn't want you to later on to be kind of frustrated by that, because that's obviously, so that kind of thing we're happy to answer right now. There's at least a couple of folks that you've identified that you might wonder, what's the employment piece look like? And so we can speak to some of that now. We would do that in a way that didn't reveal their identity.
Right.
And so, what are your questions?
Does anybody else feel like they want those questions answered, or is it just me?
I think it's going to come in the process, and I think we had kind of went through the process, that when you identify these candidates we're going to interview, that you said you knew we would all start looking into these people anyhow. You asked us not to do that for the first part and honor you guys, but everybody's going to start doing their work.
I didn't. If you have it on your cheat sheet there, I wouldn't mind going through the 7 and kind of understanding what the size of the district is.
Yeah, to the best of our ability, we're happy to answer that question. The point being, that way you're not, this is a slang term that's not very attractive, but you're not wasting an interview slot if that becomes a big determinant for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It won't take long.
All right, Mr. Johnson, you ready?
Sure, I'd like to make a motion that the Board of Education extend a offer to interview with the Farmington Board of Education, and those folks are, by order of number, and these numbers were assigned to us, the MASB, number 408, number 973, number 1005, number 52, number 1485, number 1780, and our 7th and final candidate, number 1959.
Support.
Any discussion? Okay, sorry, I made a step there. We have a motion by Mr. Johnson to invite the 7 named candidates to interview for Farmington Public Schools superintendency opening, supported by Mrs. Johnson. Any discussion?
I'm not
Mrs.
Mrs.
Smith.
Johnson.
I,
I don't need another husband.
sorry, I'm trying to Mrs. Smith.
I'm not gonna make the comment, I'm in.
All right, Mrs. Smith. Any discussion? Okay, seeing no discussion, we'll move forward. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the motion carries that we will extend that to those 7 candidates.
Fantastic.
Rod's
So,
already working on.
I was just doing one Googling.
so we will reach out to these folks, extend the interview, and then you can expect to hear back from us confirmation-wise, no later than Thursday morning. Looking at him because he likes to say tomorrow, and I'm saying Thursday because sometimes they just have to have conversations before their names become public, and I want to manage the expectations of your district and knowing when they can expect that.
So we should keep this list, these folks, their
Quiet.
names quiet until.
So they
They
accept,
have to
right?
accept it.
Right, they have
They have to accept it.
And so if any of these don't accept, then they will not be on our list.
Correct.
So we might only have 6, for example.
Okay.
And it is, I would say it is likely that somebody won't be able to do it for whatever reason. I mean, that happens sometimes.
Even in the case of the state superintendent search,
Yeah.
that happened, they had
It
to
did
use
happen,
alternates.
so it
Absolutely.
happens.
Okay,
All right, thank you. Are we ready for
Very good.
adjournment?
we almost are.
Okay, go ahead.
Before we do that, we just want to check in with you to say, okay, imagine we're back here for interviews. Before you get to that point, you will have had the interview guide, so you'd been able to review it and make sure you were ready for that. You will have a schedule of those being interviewed, obviously, you'll receive that once we get those confirmations. Any other questions that you have when you actually visualize yourself at that space and time? Yes, please.
So we talked about the website not being available after. Will we have access to the 7, still to their initial paperwork? Because
So
that would
the-
be helpful.
So what will happen is that website actually will be shut off tomorrow. And so what will happen, though, is I will provide to you packets.
Okay.
So that will be with the interview guides, you'll have that information printed, I'll bring it, Kim doesn't need to worry about that. So because you'll definitely need that.
Can I also?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, if we have 7, are we thinking 4 the first night, 3 the second night?
That's another.
And,
That way we
and
have
we're
the time
starting at
to-
5,
Watch the-
so it'd be like 5, 6, 7, 8 first night, and then 5, 6, 7, and then we boil down.
Are you, when will we get that packet?
We can email it to you when we send you the schedule for interviews. We'll send you the
Okay.
PDF of it, we're
That'd be
happy to
great.
do that. We'll share a redacted version of it with the district, so we take off any contact information, but we'll share that because everybody will want to see it. You'll have the full version and the district will get the redacted version.
More questions.
Good.
If we have additional questions on these candidates in terms of like the size of the district and other information, do we send that to you?
Yep, here's how we're going to handle this. I want to be very clear. Any questions that you have, you are to send to Dr. Green and I, and when we reply, we will provide that information to the whole board. You will not reply all. We are not deliberating, right? But just to keep an equilibrium of information. There will be some questions that you will ask that we will feel we have to cover actually in the interviews, and if that happens, we will manage that accordingly. Okay, so you can email Dr. Green and I directly. You don't have to go through your board president to do that in this case. Normally you do have to go through your board president, but in this case you don't have to. And then we'll make sure that you all have that information when we put it together, okay?
Another question, so I recall that, and I just need to make sure I'm following directions all the way through. Do not do your own research prior to this point. I did not.
You can now.
No, we can now.
Once the names are public, you can.
Okay,
So-
thank
Well, the
you.
Googling, you can Google now.
Oh.
So Googling is, private, right? I mean, it should be private.
Yeah, they've already made a decision for who to interview, so
But
there's no
they can
danger
still-
of Googling
They can
answers.
still research
They can.
any of the 7 that you want to on your own, but you shouldn't call anybody.
Right.
Yet.
Right.
Sure.
And so actually, you wouldn't call anybody between now and next Tuesday anyway, right?
Right.
They're not calling anybody unless it was a friend or something like that. I mean, they're not
No,
really
I don't
calling.
mind. I mean, you're going to get to all that anyway, but if they have a network that they want to access.
Yeah, I mean,
Their
if you knew
staff's gonna
somebody in
do
the
that,
same
yeah.
town or something like that, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, you're not doing any of that until the names are public.
And then, I think this might be my penultimate question. I don't.
Well, we learned last time that you only follow rules if they make sense to you, right?
I'm not asking what the rules are. I'm asking what the
So
rules
that's
are.
cool.
Right.
Yeah.
What sort of research are you guys gonna provide to us so that I don't,
Redo it?
duplicate effort?
Yeah.
And when will we get that? Will that be at the same time that you give us the packets?
I'll let Donna answer.
Yeah, so if there is, there's 2 different kinds of the information that you could be talking about. So if there's something that surfaces that you need to know whether we found it or something here, somebody here could have contacted us too. I mean, that's the other piece of it. I think I was telling your board president that I have received more direct communications from the public working with Farmington than I ever have before in any other district. And so that's a good thing. But so however that happens, that's what I mean by, if it can be dealt with publicly, we will address it publicly. Because if you're wondering, they're wondering. If for some reason sometimes things are hung up like legally, doesn't mean they're bad people, it doesn't mean that, but if there's some legal reason that we can't deal with it publicly, then we would share that information with you, but it would not be obviously open to the public at that point. But that's pretty unusual.
And just a reminder, although we've invited 7, as they stated, somebody may back out, so if we're Googling somebody, and we may not have all those candidates at this point until we have confirmation of acceptance.
At least it's down to 7.
There you go.
There you go.
From 29, that's
Yes.
a pretty good leap, right, exactly.
This is helpful, thank you, I just wanted to make sure I
Anybody
understood
else?
the next steps.
Super excited, right?
All right,
Very much so.
Thank you very much.
great to see everybody.
Thank you. Good seeing you.
Good to see you too.
I make the
Yes,
motion.
we're
You may
early.
make a motion.
I move that we adjourn this workshop.
Second.
We have a motion to adjourn the workshop by Mr. Muckmel, seconded by Mrs. Weems. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Motion passes, and we are officially adjourned, and we have actually 10 minutes.
2 minutes.